Hey, chiropractors, welcome to Modern Chiropractic Mastery with your host, Dr. Kevin Christie, where we discuss the latest in marketing, business, and professional growth with some of the leading experts in the industry. All right, this is the 5-year anniversary of the podcast. On April 6th, 2017, I launched the podcast and been at it weekly. And here we are for another week. This will be a little solo episode where I'm actually going to discuss a handful of things based on the fact that this has been 5 years of this podcast and the consistency of it, what it's done for me, some of my thoughts. And I'm hoping that you can take something from it, right? We may not have a direct marketing or business or economics lesson in this podcast, but I just want to give you a little bit of insights of it. And I think sometimes doing that, giving you my journey and some of my thoughts on it, maybe you'll be able to take something from it and apply it to your practice and your professional life. And so that's what I'm going to do today. Give you kind of a little bit of background on it. I can't have the curse of knowledge and assume that you know the story because we get new listeners all the time. Some of you may know it. That's fine, but I think you'll get something out of this anyway, because I do have some thoughts that are fresh, right? So how did we get here? How did we get to a podcast 5 years ago? And ultimately, it actually started with a podcast called The Modern Desk Jockey, and I had started that, I think it was August of 2016, and about August of 2016, and rolled through a bunch of podcast episodes with that. And we ended up with about 88. There was a time where I was doing both of them, and then I fell off the Modern Desk Jockey. And that was all about health and wellness for the desk worker with the goal of growing our corporate wellness business and our patient base in our practice. So we would interview people nationally, internationally even. Had some great guests like CEO of Veridesk and a bunch of other highfalutin people in the world of corporate wellness. And then we also interviewed a lot of local people, and I use it as a way of connecting locally and positioning ourselves as the expert in health and wellness for the desk worker. And so that's how I started podcasting, right? And I have a few people I wanted to thank for that. One was right out of the gates was John Lee Dumas, who was kind of the first person that I remember kind of listening to, and then he had something called the Podcaster's Paradise at the time, and it was maybe $1,000 or $1,500, but it was an online course or platform that would teach you how to podcast. And by putting down that money, really got me committed, right? And before I thank the next people I will thank, I want to go over that because that rolls into the 4 C's formula from Strategic Coach. It was really like a combination of running into John Lee Dumas's stuff and also learning about the 4 C's. And that is making a commitment. That's the first C. When you make that commitment, it's going to take courage to follow through. And then when you have the courage to follow through, you will develop a capability. And once you do that capability long enough, you will have confidence in it. I feel like I am a confident podcaster now. And at one point I was not. But me putting down that money for that Podcaster's Paradise program was the commitment I needed. And then the courage to record the first episodes and actually release them into the wild, right? And so the 4 C's is really the foundation of everything I do that challenges me. And I realize that I can almost do anything as long as I, obviously within reason. I'm not going to play in the NBA or anything right now. But professionally and even personally, in a lot of ways, I feel like the 4 C's gives me that blueprint of getting things done. Because, ultimately, I think we all know, like if you're listening to this and you're struggling professionally or in practice, you probably know there's a couple things you could be doing to change that, but you're just not. And I think the 4 C's is something that really helps, right? So that's how I really made the commitment. Someone that helped me with a capability was Steve Stewart, who I found through on that Podcaster's Paradise site. They had some vendors on there, and he was my first podcast producer. So he supplied a capability that I didn't want to do. Like, I'm not a tech savvy person, and I knew if I had to do all the tech part of it, producing and everything and getting it released and all that, I just would be a mess. So Steve was a capability for me on that, and he was great for quite a long time. And then I did transition to the Podcast Factory, which was a combination of all of my production. We were rebranded, new artwork. I shouldn't say rebranded name, kept the name, but all kinds of new artwork, new social media, coaching around podcasting. So it kind of, I thought, took me to a nice level, and did that for about a year. And then when the pandemic hit, we didn't know what was going to happen on anything. So I did look for ways to reduce expenses, but I got a lot out of working with them for about a year. And then lastly, Delegate Solutions, and in particular, Becky, who I mentioned, I think, a podcast or two ago. She is now, she is part of my Delegate Solutions team, and they do all of my podcast producing, right? So those are the people I had to thank for making this happen, because honestly, if I had to do the production side of it, we wouldn't have a podcast. We never would have had a podcast. And that was something for me to be honest with myself and make sure I wrote the check to outsource that. And so 5 years later, we're still weekly, and all I have to do is hit record, sometimes just do a solo episode on a Friday at 3:45 p.m. like I am right now, or sometimes it's an interview, and I enjoy both. That's why I do both, and that's why they alternate sometimes, right? Like I actually really enjoy the solo episodes. I thoroughly enjoy the interviews. I get so much out of those. It's great. And frankly, I think if you had to listen to me every week, just go on riffs, I wouldn't have the audience that I have now, because I know my guests that I interview bring so much value to the table, and I get a lot of feedback from that. So those are the people that I have to thank. How did the Modern Chiropractic Marketing Show, that was the original name. We have recently rebranded to Modern Chiropractic Mastery. But really how it started, again, some people know this story, but not everybody. I was really diving into the marketing stuff since 2014 for my practice, and then joined a mastermind. And I was doing a lot of work with a classmate, colleague, someone that was friends with. And we actually had decided to start an agency, and we did. And we partnered on a agency. And you got to go back. This was in 2016, and then we launched it in like July 2016, and then that was like the Facebook group, and then we launched the business on January 1st of 2017, and we actually had 7 or 8 clients that were paying a fair amount per month, and we were an agency doing the marketing for you type of thing. And you got to remember, back then it was like Facebook ads was just going like crazy. Everybody wanted to do Facebook ads, and everybody thought they were gonna make millions of dollars on Facebook ads, and so we were gonna be an ad agency for that, and we launched pretty well, but it fizzled out quickly with him and I in a partnership, because we just didn't have the same congruency within the profession of chiropractic. I definitely geared towards one side of the profession, and he was more towards the other, and we should have known that early on. And we just weren't seeing eye to eye on that. And I kind of realized also that I just didn't like being an ad agency. Like, I didn't want to be a marketing agency. That's a big difference than what the Modern Chiropractic Marketing Group or the Chiropractic Success Academy is now. And that's just was something I just didn't enjoy, didn't want to do it, and it wasn't fun for me. And so we decided to part ways, and there was going to be a buyout with a non-compete, and the non-compete was just ridiculous. wasn't a fair thought process on one end. So I decided, I was like, I'm not going to take the buyout, and the buyout was going to be nice at the time. It really would have been helpful, but I decided to pass on that, and just in exchange take the Facebook group, the email list, and the podcast concept that we had talked about in exchange for it. So that was agreed upon, and I ran with it. So I made a big bet on myself, which is one of my takeaways from this episode, is that sometimes you really have to bet on yourself, even if there's money on the other end of it, if the terms are not what you want, right? So there's always money, and then there's terms. And when you go to sell something, too often as you look at the money and you don't look at the terms, And I decided that the terms were just not something I was willing to agree upon. And so I bet on myself. And I haven't done the math, but the differential in revenue generated over the last 5 years by betting on myself versus if I would have taken that money as part of my buyout is just comical, the difference. So sometimes you have to really bet on yourself. And so once I did, right out of the gates, I mean, within 2 weeks, I launched the podcast, and that was at April 6, 2017, and just got it going. And I was, going to hit the ground running, and I did. And ultimately got some really good guests early on. I definitely had to work through who my audience was going to be, what I was going to talk about, how we were going to come up with weekly topics. There was a lot to it, but it takes me to another idea that Dan Sullivan, a strategic coach, talks about. And obviously I reference them a lot because they've really been the backbone of my entrepreneur success since 2013. But he says something called, sometimes you have to make it up and make it real. And that's what I did. I made up the podcast and made it real, and here we are. And it's been something that I've thoroughly enjoyed. I think it's grown me quite a bit. Some of the benefits that I've got out of this is definitely communication, definitely interviewing skills. It's built a business that now allows me to treat patients part-time and in a few months exiting patient care. So that's huge. I mean, if you ever wonder if content marketing works, the podcast is a perfect example of that, right? I've had people kind of make fun of our Instagram following is actually improving. So check it out, like us. Follow us. We're putting content on there and putting videos on there now. But it hasn't been a big platform for us. I really had the three-headed monster of Facebook group, podcast, and email list, but the podcast was the big driver of all of it. And sometimes you have to go a mile deep and an inch wide. And that's what I did with the podcast. And I wasn't worried about all the other platforms. And then I'll get there when I get there. And, the podcast, the Facebook group, the email list, some of that led to my public speaking that I do, which also led to the book published with Parker. So those have been my key things, but it really all is a driver from the podcast. All right, docs, here is a new opportunity for you from Darcy Sullivan of Propel. She is our SEO specialist in helping out many chiropractors with their search engine optimization and making sure Google is finding you and getting you new patients. It's amazing how many new patients chiropractors can get and are getting when they do the SEO right and a few other things. And Darcy is offering a free SEO workshop just for chiropractors, and you can sign up for that at bit.ly/propelmcm. That is bit.ly/propelmcm, Modern Chiropractic Marketing, right? And so check out that link, and we're going to have you go over 5 SEO secrets to owning the first page of Google without buying ads. And Darcy's going to give that free workshop, 1 hour, to really help grow your practice and start churning new patients from the ever mighty Google, which is still king in the online marketing. So check that out at bit.ly/propelmcm for the 1 hour free workshop. Hey doc, are you moving office spaces, or you're a startup with your own new space, or you're like me where you need renovations because it's starting to look a little worn after about 10 years like ours is? Crossfield's Chiropractic Office Design is here to elevate you wherever you're at, and they're going to help maximize your space and flow. They're going to really help attract and retain patients, and this is going to have a great ROI on your investment when you increase that patient experience. So check out Chiropractic Office Designs by Crossfields, and we have a special link for Modern Chiropractic Marketing listeners, and that is www.chiropracticofficedesign.com/Kevin-Christie. And with that, you're going to have discounts. We're going to have direct links to a mega bundle of free resources, and you can check them out, and you can get 15 of our most popular floor plans, 5-phase checklist for a startup office, 5-point designer checklist to evaluate your current office image. And there's 30% off on all online products when you go to www.chiropracticofficedesign.com/Kevin-Christie. And so it's single-handedly built a business around it. And then what's been cool also is that I learned so much information from the people I interview that a lot of that I apply to my practice, and it's allowed me to have a self-managing practice to step out of it and ultimately exit patient care. And honestly, my practice, just because my modern chiropractic / CSA has a revenue source that also helps me exit patient care, I couldn't just exit without the practice firing on all cylinders, because it has a good amount of overhead. I own the commercial real estate. It needs to fund that. Like, there's a lot of moving parts to it. And so learning the things I have from my guests and applying it has allowed me to have a very good chiropractic practice. And so I can't thank my guests enough. I mean, it's just amazing what I've learned from them, right? And I'll continue to do that. Always looking for great podcast guests. I've got a list of about 15 ideas here of people and topics that I want to make sure I get people to, sometimes I like, okay, who's the person I want to interview? And then sometimes it's like, what's the topic I want? And is there anybody that I know that I can interview and be the expert in that? And so that's what I do. And I've just jotted down about 15 names a couple days ago and going to tackle those. And so I get the question a lot about, like, do you ever run out of ideas? And it's interesting. Like, if you consistently create content enough, no matter if it's for your practice or for, say, a podcast, you end up getting this content momentum, and ideas just come, and the audience tells you what they want. And it's just, in 5 years, there's only been a couple of times where I've hit a little bit of roadblocks, but nothing crazy. And right now, I feel like I've been on a 6-month roll of, like, just really, I've been really happy with the guests I've had. I'm really happy with the guests coming up and the ideas I've got of guests. So it's rolling. We're in a good content momentum right now. But that doesn't mean there hasn't been struggles with podcasting, right? I think I'm on my 4th platform. Like, I've used Zencaster and Skype, and now I use Zoom. We've gone through a couple different websites. So there's been technical stuff. We just did a rebrand, and that didn't, that was challenging, right? Just all the different platforms and making sure we like the name and the artwork and all that. So there's always these little struggles with it. Today was a struggle, right? I got to get this podcast done, and I had a lot to do. I'm trying not to work this weekend because we got a bunch of stuff with the kids, and I got to get this to Becky to produce. And, I always reference that book, The War of Art, and the internal struggles or the resistances that are there to create. And sometimes you got to overcome it. And so sometimes, I struggle with hitting the record button and just saying, okay, we're going to go. Sometimes I look at my schedule and I've got 6 coaching calls, and then I got an interview on a podcast, and I've already talked for 5 hours, and my voice, like right now, is kind of struggling. Like, there's all these different struggles that you don't see behind the scenes with the podcast. But it's just, there's no difference. Like, whatever you do professionally, there's always going to be those struggles. And so it's never perfect. Sometimes I battle myself and say, like, I'm never going to be Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss with their audience. And I think I saw something where Tim Ferriss is, probably making $6, $7, $8 million a year from the podcast, just in ads, right? Like, that's not happening here, ladies and gentlemen. But I enjoy it anyway, and that's why I do it. So, but there's definitely struggles, no doubt about it. But well worth it. And where I think I go from here is to continue. Like, I see no reason to stop. I think what I'm going to be doing is asking you, the audience, probably in the closed Facebook group, a little bit more of what you'd like to see from me in the podcast, different types of topics and guests. If you've been listening for a little while, you do know we changed, like I mentioned, from the Modern Chiropractic Marketing Show to Modern Chiropractic Mastery. And really the reason we did it is because we just expanded the topics. I started realizing, like, look, marketing is great. And I wholeheartedly believe that every business needs to be doing marketing. I don't care how busy you are. I don't care what your goals are. There has to be marketing. And so marketing is always going to be the bedrock of this podcast. But I just started to realize, like, I talked to so many chiropractors about marketing, but their business and systems and team and all the things were just not doing well, and you layer on marketing to it, and it just doesn't move the needle as much as they need to. And so there's so many facets that makes, quote unquote, a successful practice. And we started listening to the audience and hearing those concerns. And so that's when I started having guests to talk about professional burnout, right? Or having guests about maternity leave and those types of things. I have a podcast coming up not too long on a couple that sold their practice and got amazing opportunities elsewhere, different type of practice setting. Like, we're just tackling different things that we're all dealing with around business, communication, finances, right? Obviously marketing, psychology of things, right? And so that's why we have Dr. Manuel Astruc. He's coming up again on another episode. It'll be the second time he's been on. And we talk about the anxiety of practice and anxiety of running a business, right? It's stressful. And so, and he's going to be coming on, periodically to talk about those types of things. And so that's why we rebranded to the Modern Chiropractic Mastery, because it's going to be more than just marketing, but still going to have a lot of marketing in it. Last week's episode was a little excerpt on how to become a media company for my book. And so we'll be definitely diving into marketing and other topics as we grow. And I want to listen to you. And if there's any ideas you have, I am all ears, and I'm always looking to grow this podcast, right? And so just let me know, and I'll be here to listen and start taking some of the struggles that we all have and trying to find experts that can help with that, right? One of the podcasts I got the most comments about, feedback, just loved it, was with Dr. Brock Martin, right? That one he's a doctor that's in the trenches and really transformed his practice. And it resonated with a lot of people who said to themselves, oh, okay, so I can be stuck for a handful of years. Let's just call it 5 or 7, whatever. And it doesn't mean it has to be like that forever, right? Like, I think so many chiropractors out there that have been at a certain level for X amount of years. When you're in that first year, second year, third year, you're like, it's growing. It's like, the world is your oyster, and you get this dream practice that's still there. But then sometimes, it could be year 10 and you're not anywhere where you wanted to be. And you just now assume, okay, this is where I'm always going to be. And it really beats you up, and it causes burnout, and it's frustrating. And so I think that podcast, hearing him talk about that transformation after being at one level for 6 years or so, and then now being at a completely different level, inspired a lot of people. And he just put the right things in place. And I go back to that 4 C's with you, and I think a lot of you know some of those things that really need to change in your practice. And you got to have the commitment to do it, the confidence to go through the struggle of it. You'll develop a capability, and then you'll be confident in it. And so I'm going to leave you with that. I want you to, your kind of take home for this week is to pinpoint the one thing that you really think you should be doing, you want to be doing, you've been talking about it, you've been saying about it, like you're going to do it, whatever it is that will move the needle. And try to apply that 4 C's to it, because that's ultimately what I did for this podcast. Having a podcast isn't easy, but it's not that bad. And imagine if you had something like a podcast for your local community, right? Or just a very extensive community outreach plan, or you just killed it with a patient experience, and people walk in your practice and they just like, wow, this is special, right? So pick something. There's more options than that, but pick something, work on it, and please reach out to me, Kevin@modern-jockey.com, or in the Facebook group if you have any ideas that you would love for the podcast, and I'll try to find an expert for that. Have a great week. That is it for this week's episode. But before you leave, check us out at www.modernchiropracticmarketing.com for all kinds of free resources such as blogs and the podcast episodes. We've got online courses. You can check out the Chiropractic Success Academy there, which is an amazing online coaching system for you at a very affordable monthly rate. There's a free online course on the modernchiropracticmarketing.com website, so check that out. If you're interested in some one-on-one coaching, we can do that as well. We have all kinds of resources for you there. And we would also truly appreciate if you could rate and review this podcast if you're getting valuable information out of it. I can't thank you enough, and we'll see you next week.